Hi everyone, Elizabeth here. It's been a long time since I've updated, and it's not just because of the holidays. I've been having a really hard time reading lately. And it turns out, after a lot of investigation, that I actually needed glasses, which I've never worn in my entire life. So, generally in my life, I've always thought I suffered from a lot of eye strain, and I would generally characterize myself as visually lazy. And what I mean by that is I would be able to read large amounts of smallish text like this, but I didn't like to. It was very easy to sort of tire my eyes out. And I always thought of it as, eye strain, or I'm sort of visually lazy. I always like to have ebooks where I could blow up the font size to be really big. And I just preferred big font sizes so I could sort of be further away while I was reading. And I was always sort of skirting around the limit of how much I could push through with my eye strain. And then over the winter break, I found myself reading a lot more, to the point where I just got like a lot of eye pain, and it was becoming really hard to read. So it turns out that what I thought was visual laziness, it turns out is something called convergence insufficiency, which means that even though I've always had 20/20 vision, my eyes don't like to come together to focus on a nearby point, and it just takes a lot for my eyes to focus. And the muscles of my eyes are literally weak, so it's literally hard for them to focus. So I sort of strained my eyes really badly. So I've got these glasses, which should help. But the problem is I've never worn glasses in my entire life. So when I wear them, I get really dizzy and I get headaches. And I was told that it can take up to a couple of weeks to be able to wear these. So I can wear them for about 20 minutes at a time, and then I really have to take them off. So unfortunately, I haven't really been doing much reading at all. Before all that happened, I really wanted to do a review of At Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, which is what I read last month, which I loved. But I'll have to put that off for a while, I think, before I can sort of write up notes for that and everything. So look forward to that later. And I was in the middle of reading three different books that I think I'll have to put aside for now. One was, I think I must have got this from Kathy Grimm at the Grimm Reader, because I don't know how else I would have heard of this, but is called The Secret Service by Wendy Walker, which is has a really interesting premise, sort of a magical realist book about a sort of fictionalized 18th or 19th century England, where their MI5 or their CIA agents or whatever who are charged with protecting the king, their undercover agents, are able to sort of transform themselves into inanimate objects like dishware or roses or things like that. And these particular objects they become objects of fascination for spies who are trying to bring down the monarchy. And just the pun of the title is what immediately drew me in. And it's wonderfully written, at least what I read of it when I read it. And it just seems super interesting, right up my alley, and I think I said magical realist sort of style that I really like. And it seems very interesting and sort of funny, and at the same time, very well written. This is actually an example. I waited forever to get this from the library, and the text is about this big. And that's when I felt visually lazy. I thought, well, I can read this, but I don't want to. So I had to do some investigative work, and I tracked down the ebook, which was very hard to find. It's only available on Gumroad for some reason, and I actually ended up buying the ebook because I wanted the text to be a lot bigger. Maybe that should have been maybe that should have been a sign. I should have understood that maybe. There's a reason why I want to read everything in such big print. And I had to completely give up on this book. I can't really remember why I got this book or what it's even about, because it took so long to get this book from Interlibrary Loan. But It's a sort of a manga from the 80s, I think, from Japan. It's called Miss Ruki. I think I was interested in it because I think the New York Review of Books reissued this or something. But can I just show you the text in this? I mean, it's absolutely tiny. I don't even know if anyone, like normal visioned people can read this, but I'm gonna have to return both of these books because the text was too small. So that's a little bit of a bummer. I'm hoping that it won't take me the full 2 weeks to get used to the glasses. And then after I get used to the glasses, it's possible I'll have to mess around with the prescription and eye exercises and all this stuff. So I don't know how long it's going to take for me to get back up to full steam. I could be feeling better in a couple of days, a couple of weeks. I hope not a couple of months, but it's possible. It has given me a chance to explore different avenues, and I have been trying out audiobooks actually to take the place of reading lately. And usually, I've never really been a huge fan of audiobooks. I know that for some people they're really wonderful. For me, it's like a completely different medium. I actually kind of have a tough time following audiobooks. I think my listening comprehension is a lot lower than my reading comprehension. I have a tough time like picking up on people's names if there are like a lot of characters. I feel like I often miss important sudden changes in narrative if it's just mentioned really quickly. And I find it really challenging to have this sort of narrative constantly washing over you all the time, and there's no time to sort of stop and reflect. It just feels very very passive to me. There's no conversation you're having with the author. This is how it feels for me anyway. It just feels very difficult to sort of have an interaction with the author. It feels more like the author, the narrator have interacted, and then you're sort of just passively standing by witnessing it or something. And so it's very hard for me because I feel like I'm sort of in this straitjacket made to be very, very passive while I listen to this thing. And I think as I've been listening to a few audiobooks, I've learned that basically, what works for me in audiobook form is a bit different from what works for me in like regular book form. In the past, I would sometimes listen to audiobooks like at the gym or something, but usually I kind of preferred podcasts or something with extemporaneous speech. And I think it still holds for me after listening to a few audiobooks that I prefer, I think, like sort of shorter sentences, simpler language is easier for me in terms of like the audio medium. And then once I made those adjustments, I've sort of started to enjoy them more. I still find it difficult like to pick up names and stuff, but I have enjoyed several audiobooks now. So I've listened to 3 audiobooks that I'll do some quick reviews on. I'll name them out right now because I don't think I'm going to put timestamps on this because it's just too much computer work right now. So the 3 that I'll be going over are The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow, Cotillion by Georgette Heyer, and The Corner That Held Them by Sylvia Townsend Warner. And so these are the 3 that I've listened to since having to put down my books, so that's a real bummer. Okay, but so the first book, The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow, that was a real surprise for me. I have no idea why I picked it up because usually I really avoid books that are like extensions of other books by different writers. Like I don't tend to go for the reimagining of someone else's work. I just have always found it kind of derivative and sort of, I don't know, I guess writing on the coattails, it seems to me anyway, sort of trying to write on the coattails of a more famous writer so that your name will follow along with them. I remember I was just so disappointed. I read Erasure by Percival Everett, and I thought it was amazing. I loved it. And he has got an enviable command of the English language. He's a wonderful writer. He's super funny. And I just thought he's one of our best living writers in the US. And then when he came out with Jim, I was just so disappointed because it just, it's not even, it's somewhat acceptable in my opinion if it's like not even a secondary character, but like maybe a tertiary character. And if the reason why we're invoking a more famous piece is for some very specific reason. So maybe like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is a really good example of the rare time that I think it's okay to do this, because the entire point of that piece is that there are these two guys and they're sort of, they have no story of their own. They're waiting to partake in someone else's story. That's one reason why it works. Another reason is because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern really are not characters whatsoever in Hamlet. And it really doesn't interact with the Hamlet story at all. It's really very much Stoppard's own story. So there are sort of limited cases where I think it's okay, but Jim was so disappointing because he just takes a main character and just reimagines the whole thing. I really shouldn't. I feel that it's not really fair to criticize a book I haven't read, and I haven't read it because I was so put off by the premise. But just the very premise of it that we're going to rewrite a main character from another person's book sort of rubbed me the wrong way. And then from what I know about the story, that it sort of refashions the story such that Jim isn't quite so abjectly put down and he's not so ill-educated, and there's this secret society of African-American brotherhood and all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to imagine, but I sort of feel like it pulls away from the tragedy that is Jim. I mean, it's sort of like imagine any hero, any hero you want, like say Joan of Arc. Say we wrote a new story about Joan of Arc that the entire time she never felt any pain whatsoever. She was having a wonderful time leading the French army, and in the end, when she was burnt at the stake, don't worry about it. It smelled like roses, and she just, it was all fun and gay. Like, it sort of takes away from the point of the original, it seems to me. But I won't go too deep into that because I didn't actually read the book. I know everyone loves the book. I know I've been lectured on this in person, don't worry. But just the very concept of it sort of rubs me the wrong way. Like, Percival Everett, you're an amazing writer. Just come up with your own ideas, write your own story. And I really don't like that this trend for these sort of derivative, because now Percival Everett, if he is remembered after, in 100 years or whatever, it'll always be in the same breath as Mark Twain. I mean, it really is sort of holding on to Mark Twain's coattails into immortality, which I just don't like that. But to get back to the other Bennet sisters, so usually I would be very, very prejudiced against, speaking of Pride and Prejudice, I would be terribly prejudiced against a book like this. But for some reason, I don't know why, the idea of a story about Mary, the ugly sister in Pride and Prejudice, it really amused me. So I picked it up. I think maybe it's because there are just so many Pride and Prejudice sequels now that I've seen floating around that, if there are 50 of them, maybe the 51st doesn't matter so much. If there were this long tradition of writing Huck Finn sequels, maybe Jim wouldn't have offended me so much. I don't know. But it was sort of amusing, and it was actually pretty good. It was a lot more interesting than I expected it to be. And I really liked the structure of it so far as I could tell what the structure was. So when I'm listening to audiobooks, I have a little bit of a harder time deciphering what the structure of a story is. It kind of just feels like events keep coming. And I feel like I'm fairly blind to style. It's very hard for me to distinguish what the style is like. And I've also noticed that I think comedy gets a little bit flattened when I listen to audiobooks, because somehow that witty last sentence of a paragraph just sounds a little bit less pert, or maybe it just sticks out a little bit less when you can't see the structure of the paragraphs. So I'm still an audiobook beginner. I don't feel like I have the best insight into these stories when I listen to them as opposed to read them. But as I think I said, the other Bennet sister is, I should have introduced at the beginning. The other Bennet sister obviously is about the other Bennet sister. So it's about Mary Bennet, the middle sister in Pride and Prejudice. So Lizzie has gone off with Darcy, and Jane has gone off with Bingham, and Lydia has gone off with Wickham, and what about poor old Mary, right? And so what I liked about this book is it kind of takes a comedy of manners, Pride and Prejudice, and it kind of imagines, okay, but what if all the side characters, instead of just being foils, like comedic foils for our heroine, what if they were actually real people? Like, what if we just made them into real three-dimensional characters? And so we take that most seriously with Mary. We watch her grow up. It's kind of like a Bildungsroman in a very nice kind of way. And what I liked about it is at the beginning, you kind of take a tour of the other characters from Pride and Prejudice. And she is absolutely, as far as I could tell, like pitch perfect in writing Jane and Lizzie and just the mother and everything, Mrs. Bennet, and the father, Mr. Bennet. She has a good ear for dialogue and for making them act just right. It really does feel like a natural extension of the book. But we do get to like sort of break away, and she gets to design her own world eventually. So Mary, I like that one of the main plot points is about her having to get glasses so that she can read. That was kind of funny. Mary, she starts out very plain. She's seen as the plain sister. It sort of imagines seriously what would it really be like if Lizzie Bennet and and Jane Bennet were your sisters and you were the ugly sister. What would you do? And so a lot of it's about her growing up, finding her own interests, trying to get out from underneath the shadow of her sisters. And it's pretty well done. And you kind of get to see other characters from behind the curtain. So you get to see more of Charlotte Lucas. I thought it was really cool what she did with Charlotte Lucas, because she's sort of a very... she's sort of a much more subtle character. She's sort of good and bad at the same time, and she's a foil for Mary. You get to see Mr. Collins much more as a real human being, and then you get to see Mary sort of develop into a young woman from a very insecure, from the sort of, as she is in the book, kind of a clown. You see her from the inside, and you see her sort of develop into a young woman. It's very satisfying, and it's a really nice book. One thing that I thought was interesting about it is when she does finally meet up with her love interest. So it's on the My Big Fat Greek Wedding kind of model, right? Mousy girl needs to sort of find herself first before she's ready for a man, which I think is the best way. I really like, if it's got to be a romance, I like that because, she sort of figures herself out first, and then we move on to the guy. What I thought was interesting about it is I kind of thought that it's interesting how it has a modern sensibility baked into this historical narrative. In a lot of ways, her love interest is sort of more interesting and cool and appealing than Darcy or Bingham, because he's a modern man in a way. In a sense, what are you supposed to talk to Mr. Darcy about? I mean, how do we talk to Mr. Darcy? Whereas her love interest, he's sort of loves poetry, and he's sort of really intellectually alive, and they're this meeting of minds. And it's sort of interesting that we see a lot of transition in this book from it's in the Regency sort of historical period, but in a way we kind of move from the source material to the material of this new book, which can't help but sort of reflect modern sensibilities. So we move from the countryside to sort of a city setting, which I think is a lot more, sort of familiar to modern readers. In a lot of Regency writing, I think we stay out in the countryside. We don't want any dark satanic mills in our in our romance. But Mary is a modern woman. She goes and she lives in London. She has a much more sort of, in my opinion, subtly much more modern relationship with the guy that she gets with. It's sort of interesting to me because when you reflect on it, it's interesting to read these kinds of books because you're looking at what is the fantasy. And I think that in books like Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre, a lot of the fantasy is kind of twofold. Number one, how can I get into a fantasy relationship in which I'm sort of an equal partner? And I think that's kind of reflected. It's very, very present in Jane Eyre. When Rochester proposes to her and he's kind of holding all the cards, he has all this information she doesn't have, and he keeps trying to buy her lots and lots of presents. And it's sort of this way of sort of bulldozing over her or pushing her over, and she refuses to take his presents. And she has to go and sort of grow up, become independent. She even gets her own independent fortune, her own independent livelihood and everything. And only then they get together. And in my opinion, Bronte even kind of pushes it too far, because one of the ways in which they're made into equals in a way is not just that Jane grows up, but Rochester has to have a bit of a fall. He goes blind and everything. I think even Bronte kind of acknowledges that it's a little bit too much when at the very end he gets a little bit of his sight back. But definitely a lot of that is about kind of evening things out, because in the beginning, yes, there's love, but love isn't enough, right? Rochester keeps calling her, does he call her a fairy? He calls her a sylph. He has this very sort of controlling and condescending attitude towards Jane. And a lot of the book, when it comes to their relationship, is fulfilling the fantasy of somehow being a governess who gets with the master, but as an equal, right? And even in Pride and Prejudice, that's there, right? I mean, it's important not just that Lizzie turns down Mr. Collins, which, you know, she has despite being in a vulnerable position, she has the ability, she's not going to just be sold off to the highest bidder, which is what her mom wants her to do, right? She's able to turn down Collins, but she not only does that, she turns down Darcy. And I think that's a very important part of the book, because it's part of their sort of evening out, and sort of these books show the fantasy of how one can sort of establish a relationship at this time period, with the dream of sort of social equality, where you're not sort of being pushed around. When Darcy first proposes to Lizzie, he's unbearably sort of arrogant and just assumes that she'll say yes, and he sort of thinks he's completely in control, and it's only by saying no and sort of the rest of the book, a lot of it is sort of rejigging. A lot of it's about learning and so on, about who they are, each other are, but it's also about rejigging the relationship so that they have a different sort of rapport, right? And what I thought was interesting about that is not only do we move from the countryside to the city, not only is Mary sort of, she moves down in a way from being a gentleman's daughter, as one would say, to being sort of a upper bourgeois, which also is showing how is also sort of the Geist, the way that society is going, but also her relationship with the love interest. It's much more about it's that whole part of the equality thing, that somewhat rivalry where there's this establishment of the pecking order or whatever just doesn't exist at all, because that doesn't really apply in sort of modern fantasies of perfect man or whatever, and it kind of allows him to be a different kind of hero. He's really interesting. They meet. They're a meeting of minds, just like Jane and Rochester. But he has different flaws. He's sort of a more modern hero. He's sort of diffident, and he's not completely confident. He is not a romantic hero. He's not overly passionate, or, you know, he's not sort of overcome with emotion. That would be the romantic hero's flaws. But instead, he's this sort of I don't know. He's sort of you can imagine him being in sort of a modern movie as the hero. He's like, you know, they have so much in common, but he's a bit shy, and it's hard for one or the other of them to make a move. And then even at the end, I don't want to completely spoil this book, but even at the end, Mary has a moment where she gets to act completely in a way that would only entertain or be approved of by a modern audience. And that's the other thing I was going to say, is that it's interesting because one of the other fantasies I think these types of books are fulfilling is the fantasy of being able to act completely within propriety, so acting blamelessly and nevertheless getting what you want. So you're in this society where there are a lot of social rules, and you must comply or else your reputation will be spoiled. and somehow managing through all of that propriety to to somehow still get what you want, get that brass ring. With Mary, it's interesting because I always love these sort of historical fiction books because you get to see everyone still acting out the propriety, but then you get to sort of dig underneath and see what's really going on in the human side of things that you can't see with contemporaneous writing. So you get to see Mr. Collins from another side, although he gives a speech that I think is fairly unrealistic. But Mary gets to, it's a different fantasy, right? Mary gets to sort of it's not that she follows all the rules of propriety and still comes out smelling like a rose, getting what she actually really truly wanted. But at the end, she gets to figure out who she is. She gets to become an independent person. And at the very end, she gets to just flout society. And I know these are all generalities. I mean, in a lot of ways, Jane Eyre flouts society, but I just mean it as sort of a general thing. It's very pleasing, I think, reading this story because it does appeal to us as modern readers. And I thought that was it was sort of interesting listening to it and then sort of thinking about how this compares to Pride and Prejudice and other sort of stories from that time, and then forgetting to listen and then having to pause and then having to rewind because the narration keeps going even as you're thinking, oh, that drives me nuts. But anyway, I'll get used to it. So the next book I won't take so long on is Cotillion by Georgette Heyer. My buddy Andrew at You Could Be Reading More, the lovely Andrew, he is nuts about Georgette Heyer, and so I had to pick up one of her books, and it's just lovely. Like, if you could get Rainbow Sherbet in book form, it would be this book. It's just like lighter than air, super fun, funny, and it's another sort of Regency romance. So I've had a lot of Regency romances in mind lately, and I noticed that Georgette Heyer and I share a birthday, so I think it was meant to be. So this book is about a young woman. She's the ward of a very, very rich but very stingy man. That man is soon to die, I guess everyone knows, including himself. He's just old, I suppose, and so he he endows to her the knowledge that she will be inheriting his entire fortune, but only if she marries one of his, I think, 4 nephews. So hilarity ensues, a light romance ensues. It's another book in which she kind of one of the premises is that she's so bored in the countryside and she's sort of ready to party in London, so she wants to run away to London. And how is she going to do that? Well, of course, by creating a fake engagement with one of the nephews. Why not? And so she, in the grand tradition of the best the best sort of teenage like romance flicks everywhere. She has a fake engagement with the nephew. She arrives in London ready to party, but it turns out that a lot of what she needs to do is set up other people in various comedic ways. And it's super cute. I really recommend it just for a rainy day. Or any time you just need a pick-me-up. It's just really, really fun and sweet, and just like, it kind of reminds me maybe of The Importance of Being Earnest or something. It's that kind of like just fun, funny people. And so, I really liked that. And I think I'll be reading or listening to or whatever more Georgette Heyer. I was very disappointed that the version I listened to, which was from Naxos, was abridged. So I don't know what I've missed out on, but I thought it was pretty fun. And so the last one I'm listening to still, I'm only about a third through, is The Corner That Held Them by Sylvia Townsend Warner. And this was a completely random find because I've been using Libby, which is like the library app for audiobooks. And everything is checked out all the time. It's really hard to get anything on Libby. Everything is like a multi-week wait. And I had this long, long wish list that I made ages ago. I don't even know when. And this book, The Corner That Held Them, was pretty much the only book that was immediately available. So I rented it. And I've really, really liked it. It's a very different kind of feel from the other 2 books I've listened to. So it's still a historical fiction novel, but it's about nuns at a fictional convent in, so far it's been mostly the 14th century. And it's not really about any one character, which is what's kind of interesting. It reminds me a little bit of A Canticle for Leibowitz, which I read recently in that way. But it's obviously not science fictional, so it just sort of follows an entire convent, like a community. So we start with the convent's founding, and then we sort of flash forward a little bit, and we sort of follow the entire community. No one person is the main figurehead. So right now, there's the abbess who's obsessed with building a spire for the convent. The convent is in sort of this swampy Finland, and so it's sort of a very unromantic country, and it's sort of this poor, financially unstable convent, and the abbess is obsessed with getting a spire. There's a woman who was a nun, but she fell off the wagon, so to speak, 3 different times, chasing after 3 different men. So she was defrocked. There are a lot of different characters. This is one time when it's very hard for me to follow because there are a number of women, and it's very hard for me to pick up all the different names. And what I like about it is it's sort of a very I like that it's very pedestrian. There's no sort of grand narrative or aim, seemingly. There's no one big. A lot of the events are somewhat meaningless. Some of them last. Some of the events reverberate down the years, and some of them don't. And a lot of it is actually about boredom, about the boredom of being in this place, of wanting to live, of wanting something to happen. And I think that's sort of interesting. It's not a problem we have in modern times, I think, as much. And so I've really enjoyed it. It's a very sort of serene. Serene isn't the right word because it makes it sound peaceful. Not much of it is too peaceful, but it's this sort of it's a sort of slow burn book that I've really been enjoying. So those are the 3 books I've been listening to. The 3 books I had to put down, did I mention that I was reading in print that I hope to, at some point, hopefully relatively soon, pick up again, are The Secret Service by Wendy Walker, which I mentioned, that's that one. West with the Night by Beryl Markham, which is like an autobiography of the first woman who flew across the Atlantic. And she grew up in Africa. She was a British woman. And she just had this really sort of interesting, colorful life. And she was a very gifted writer. Hemingway loved her autobiography. And it's sort of about, I only got to read very little of it, but she sort of has this one-woman plane taxi service in the early 20th century. And it seemed really interesting. It kind of reminded me of The English Patient a little bit, if you're interested in that. Or that other book, Out of Africa. I only ever saw the movie. But it's sort of in that style. If that's interesting to you. And then the last one I was interested in was The Violinist's Thumb by Sam Keane, which is like a pop nonfiction book about DNA. It's a little old now, from about 2012, but I've always just been fascinated by epigenetics. Epigenetic changes are really interesting to me. So that's when, we have our DNA, which is the set sort of instructions. But it's not as, the body isn't as inflexible as that makes it sound, because you can basically turn on and off different genes through something called methylation, which is when the DNA kind of scrunches up and turns off. And so everything you do, from what you eat for breakfast to how much you sleep to your emotions to every single thing you do, sort of turns on and off all these different genes. And it's very active, and it's sort of this very different genetic landscape from what I was taught when I was a kid. And so I've gotten really interested in epigenetics. But I sort of feel like I'm floating way up here when I'm reading about epigenetics, and I wanted a more basic introduction to just the traditional, Mendel and pea plants and all that, those types of stories. So it's just it's a fun, sort of very light book of anecdotes that sort of introduces you to classical genetics and stuff like that. So I've been interested in that. So those are the three I hope to review and read soon. And yeah, I don't know if I'll keep reviewing audiobooks that I've been listening to, just because I feel like my listening comprehension really needs some work. But if anyone's interested in that, I can keep updating about that. I might try to do some different kinds of videos, like uploading, people really like to do lists, like, 5 of my favorite books or something like that. Maybe I'll do that. But yeah, that's where I am right now, reading not at all and wearing my glasses at about 20 minutes at a time, and just hoping that my eyes recover and stop feeling so strained so I can get back to normal life. But anyway, I hope everyone had a great holiday time and New Year. I was going to make a New Year's resolutions video also that I didn't get to make. A lot of my resolutions got broken by this weird eyeglasses thing. But anyway, I'm sure maybe I'll come up with February resolutions or whenever I feel better. But anyway, I hope everyone else had a great holiday season and a new year, a happy new year. And yeah, I guess I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.